The smallest choices often create the biggest changes. I did not know that on the afternoon everything began. At the time, all I knew was that I was hungry. Really hungry. The kind of hunger that settles quietly into your stomach after you spend weeks trying to stretch every dollar a little farther than it should go. My name is Olivia Parker. I was 28 years old, living in a tiny apartment on the east side of Manhattan, working full-time as an administrative assistant for a logistics company that barely remembered I existed. The paycheck covered rent. Most months. The rest required creativity, patience, and more instant coffee than any doctor would recommend. That Thursday started like every other Thursday. I woke up before sunrise, rode a crowded subway downtown, spent 8 hours answering emails, updating spreadsheets, and listening to people complain about problems far above my pay grade. By noon, I was counting the minutes until lunch. I had packed a simple turkey sandwich, an apple, and a bottle of water. Nothing special, just enough to get me through the rest of the day. The weather was unusually warm for early October, so instead of eating inside the office break room, I walked to a small public park a few blocks away. The city felt different there. Quieter. Slower. Office towers still surrounded everything, but the trees softened the edges. For 30 minutes it felt possible to forget how fast the world moved. I found an empty bench near a fountain and opened my lunch bag. The smell of fresh bread immediately made my stomach growl. I smiled to myself and picked up the sandwich. Then I noticed him. A little boy sat alone on a nearby bench. Maybe 7 years old. Maybe 8. His clothes were clean but worn. His sneakers looked too small. Most heartbreaking of all, he was staring directly at my lunch. Not casually. Not curiously. The way a hungry person looks at food. I tried looking away. I really did. For a few seconds I convinced myself that someone would be back for him. Parent. A guardian. Somebody. But when I glanced over again, he was still there. Still watching. Still hungry. The sandwich suddenly felt much heavier in my hands. Stood up before I could talk myself out of it. The boy looked nervous when I approached. I smiled gently. Hey, are you hungry? He hesitated, then nodded. That was all it took. I handed him the sandwich. For a second he simply stared at it, like he could not believe it was real. Then he looked up at me. Really? I nodded. Really? The smile that appeared on his face could have powered half of Manhattan. He thanked me 3 times before unwrapping it. I sat back down on my bench with nothing but my apple and water. Oddly enough, I did not regret it. Not even a little. Watching him eat felt better than eating it myself. After a few minutes, a woman rushed toward him from across the park. Relief flooded her face when she saw him. She thanked me repeatedly after learning what happened. I told her it was nothing, because honestly it was just a sandwich, just lunch, just one small choice. A few minutes later, I threw away my empty water bottle and headed back toward the office. I never noticed the black luxury sedan parked across the street. I never noticed the man sitting inside. I never noticed the way his attention followed me as I disappeared into the crowd. If I had looked through the tinted window, I would have seen Vincent Moretti watching the park in complete silence. I would have seen a man who had built an empire studying a moment most people would forget before dinner. But I did not look. I simply went back to work with an empty stomach and a completely ordinary afternoon. At least that was what I thought. It should not have bothered him. That was the strange part. Vincent Moretti spent his days making decisions that affected companies, properties, and hundreds of employees across New York. He attended meetings worth millions of dollars. He negotiated contracts. He managed responsibilities most people would never see. Yet somehow a woman giving away a sandwich refused to leave his mind. The black sedan moved slowly through afternoon traffic while the city rushed around him. His driver focused on the road. Vincent sat quietly in the back seat, staring through the window. Most people assumed power changed what a person noticed. In his experience, the opposite was true. Power revealed what truly mattered. And what he had seen in that park was not generosity. Generosity was easy when someone had plenty. What stayed with him was the expression on Olivia's face after she handed over her lunch. She had been hungry too. He had noticed the hesitation. The brief glance at the sandwich before she stood up. The decision had cost her something. That was different. That mattered. Meanwhile, I spent the rest of my afternoon pretending my stomach was not empty. By 3 o'clock, the apple was long gone. By 4 o'clock, coffee became my best friend. By 5 o'clock, I was convinced I could hear every vending machine in the building calling my name. Unfortunately, payday was still 2 days away. I laughed at myself and focused on work instead. That evening, after the office emptied, my manager stopped by my desk. His name was Richard. He was the kind of supervisor who always looked stressed even on good days. "Olivia, before you leave, I need a favor." I smiled politely. "Of course." He handed me a folder thick with paperwork. My smile immediately disappeared. "Please tell me this is for next week." "Tomorrow morning." I stared at him. "That is at least 3 hours of work." He sighed. "I know. I would not ask if it was not important." I wanted to say no. Every part of me wanted to say no. But I could see genuine exhaustion on his face. So I nodded. "I will take care of it." An hour later, I was still sitting alone in the office while darkness settled outside the windows. The cleaning crew arrived. Most of the building lights turned off. My stomach continued protesting. Eventually, I finished the reports and headed home. The subway ride felt longer than usual. By the time I reached my apartment, I was exhausted. Dinner consisted of instant noodles and determination. Nothing glamorous. Nothing impressive. Just reality. Across the city, however, Vincent's evening was unfolding very differently. He sat at the head of a private dinner meeting inside an elegant Manhattan restaurant. Crystal glasses reflected warm light across polished wood tables. Conversations centered around investments and expansion plans. Yet even there, surrounded by executives and advisors, his thoughts occasionally drifted back to the woman in the park. At one point, a colleague noticed his distraction. "Everything all right?" Vincent glanced toward the city skyline beyond the windows. "I was thinking about someone." The answer surprised even him. Later that night, before leaving the restaurant, he made a simple request. One phone call. One question. Nothing more. Find out who she is. No explanation followed. None was needed. Somewhere in Manhattan, I fell asleep believing the day had been completely ordinary. I had no idea that a man I had never met was already searching for my name. And I certainly had no idea that our lives had quietly begun moving toward each other. People reveal who they are when nobody is paying attention. That was something Vincent had learned a long time ago. The problem was that very few people ever passed the test. 3 days after the afternoon in the park, a thin folder landed on his desk inside the Moretti Holdings headquarters. It contained exactly what he had requested. Olivia Parker, 28 years old, administrative assistant, no criminal record, no scandals, no hidden agenda, no social media obsession, no suspicious financial activity, just pages filled with ordinary details. An ordinary woman living an ordinary life. Yet the deeper Vincent read, the more unusual she seemed. The report showed that she consistently volunteered for community events. She donated small amounts to local charities despite having very little money herself. She regularly helped coworkers complete projects without asking for credit. One line in particular caught his attention. Several employees had described her using the same word. Reliable. Vincent leaned back in his chair and stared out at the Manhattan skyline. Reliable. In a city full of people chasing attention, influence, and recognition, the word felt strangely rare. Meanwhile, my own life continued exactly as it always had. Monday became Tuesday. Tuesday became Wednesday. I spent my mornings answering emails and my afternoons solving problems that somehow multiplied faster than I could finish them. Nothing exciting happened. Nothing dramatic. If someone had told me that a powerful businessman was reading reports about my life, I would have laughed and asked whether they needed more sleep. On Thursday afternoon, however, something unusual happened at work. One of the newer employees, a young woman named Hannah, accidentally submitted incorrect information to an important client. It was not a disaster, but it was serious enough to create complications. By the time I learned about it, Hannah was sitting in an empty conference room trying not to cry. I found her staring at her computer screen. "Hey," I said gently. She immediately looked away. "I messed everything up." He sat beside her. "What happened?" She explained the mistake between frustrated breaths. The more she talked, the worse she felt. By the end, she seemed convinced her career was over. I reviewed the situation carefully. Then I smiled. This is fixable. Hannah blinked. It is. Absolutely. The next 2 hours disappeared into phone calls, corrected reports, updated documentation, and careful communication with the client. It was not fun. It was not easy. But eventually the problem was solved. When everything was finished, Hannah looked at me with visible relief. Thank you. I shrugged. Everyone needs help sometimes. What I did not know was that someone else would eventually hear about that moment too. Across town, another update had reached Vincent's desk. Not because he was actively spying on me. Simply because curiosity had become interest, and interest had become something more difficult to explain. He found himself reading every new detail his team collected. The pattern never changed. Every story sounded the same. Olivia helped people. Olivia stayed late. Olivia took responsibility. Olivia expected nothing in return. Most people behave differently when life became difficult. According to everything he had learned, I behaved exactly the same. Late Friday evening, Vincent sat alone in his office reviewing documents. His phone buzzed with another message from an associate. He glanced at the screen. A simple summary. Employee assisted coworker despite additional workload. No recognition requested. Vincent smiled. Slightly. For reasons he could not fully explain, that small update improved his mood. Then he stood and walked toward the window overlooking the city. Somewhere among the millions of lights below, Olivia Parker was finishing another ordinary day. She still had no idea he existed. But for the first time in a very long time, Vincent Moretti found himself looking forward to meeting someone. And that realization surprised him more than anything else. A person's character becomes impossible to ignore when they keep making the same choice. That was what Vincent was discovering. Every new detail seemed to confirm the same thing. Olivia Parker was exactly who she appeared to be. Honest, kind, uncomplicated. In his world, those qualities were far rarer than intelligence or ambition. Meanwhile, I was busy surviving another week at the office. Quarter-end reporting season had arrived, which meant stress levels were climbing faster than temperatures ever could. Everyone looked exhausted. Everyone sounded exhausted. Even the coffee machine seemed tired. Friday morning started badly, and somehow continued getting worse. An important presentation was scheduled for one of the company's largest clients. Several departments had contributed information. Multiple managers had reviewed the final documents. Everything should have been ready. Then, less than an hour before the meeting, someone discovered a serious data error. Numbers had been entered incorrectly. Forecasts no longer matched supporting reports. Panic spread through the office almost instantly. People rushed between desks. Phones started ringing. Managers gathered in conference rooms. Nobody seemed entirely sure where the mistake originated. Unfortunately, confusion has a habit of looking for a target. Before long, attention landed on a coworker named Daniel. Daniel had only joined the company 6 months earlier. He was hardworking but quiet, the kind of employee who often got overlooked until something went wrong. As conversations became more heated, I watched him shrink deeper into his chair. Several people assumed the error must have been his fault. The evidence was weak. The accusations were not. Something about the situation felt wrong. I reviewed the reports myself. Then I reviewed them again. The deeper I looked, the clearer the answer became. Daniel had not created the mistake. He had actually corrected part of it weeks earlier. The remaining problem originated elsewhere. By lunchtime, a meeting had been scheduled with senior leadership. Daniel looked absolutely miserable. Most people would have stayed out of it. Honestly, part of me wanted to stay out of it too. Getting involved rarely improved anyone's day. Yet every time I looked at Daniel, I remembered the little boy in the park. I remembered Hannah. I remembered all the moments when someone needed help, and nobody wanted the responsibility. Eventually, I stood up and walked into the conference room carrying a stack of documents. The discussion stopped immediately. I explained what I had found. Calmly. Clearly. Step by step. The room became quieter with every page. By the end, the truth was obvious. Daniel was not responsible. In fact, he had helped prevent a much larger issue from developing. Relief washed across his face. Embarrassment appeared on several others. The meeting ended with corrected information and a workable solution. No celebration followed. No aplausos. People simply returned to work. That was enough. Later that afternoon, Daniel stopped by my desk. "Thank you," he said quietly. I smiled. "You would have done the same thing." He laughed softly. "I am not sure about that." Neither was I. Across Manhattan, however, another report was arriving at Moretti Holdings. Vincent read the summary late that evening. The details were brief. Employee publicly defended coworker despite personal risk. Situation resolved. He stared at the page longer than necessary. What fascinated him was not the action itself. It was the consistency. Olivia kept choosing the harder path. Not because she expected rewards. Not because anyone was watching. Simply because she believed it was the right thing to do. Vincent closed the file and walked toward the windows overlooking the city. Thousands of lights stretched into the distance. Somewhere among them, Olivia was probably finishing another ordinary evening. Yet for the first time he found himself wondering what would happen if their paths actually crossed. And for reasons he could not explain, he was beginning to hope that day arrived sooner rather than later. Good things rarely arrive with an announcement. Most of the time they appear quietly, disguised as coincidence. That was exactly how the next chapter of my life began. 2 weeks after the situation with Daniel, small changes started happening around me. First, I barely noticed. A project I expected to lose was suddenly assigned back to me. A difficult client unexpectedly praised my work during a leadership meeting. An outdated software request that had been ignored for months was approved almost overnight, making my workload significantly easier. None of these things were dramatic. None seemed connected. They were simply unusual enough to catch my attention. "You are having a lucky month," Hannah told me one afternoon while we organized reports. I laughed. "Do not say that too loudly. The universe might hear you." She smiled. Seriously though, things seem different lately. I wanted to disagree. Instead, I found myself glancing at the growing list of positive developments on my desk. She had a point. Something did feel different. Across Manhattan, Vincent was having a similar conversation. Only his version involved executives instead of office employees. "You are spending an unusual amount of time discussing one administrative assistant," one of his advisors remarked during a meeting. Vincent looked up from a document. "Am I?" "Yes." A faint smile touched the corner of Vincent's mouth. "Interesting." The advisor hesitated. "May I ask why?" Vincent closed the folder. "Because integrity interests me." The answer sounded simple. Yet everyone in the room understood it meant the conversation was over. Later that evening, another opportunity appeared in my life. My company announced a professional development scholarship for employees seeking additional certifications. Historically, these programs went to senior staff members with stronger connections. Nobody expected entry-level employees to receive consideration, including me. Hannah convinced me to apply anyway. "What is the worst that could happen?" she asked. "Rejection," I replied immediately. She rolled her eyes. "Besides that, I finally submitted the application and forgot about it. Or at least I tried to." 3 days later, an email arrived. "Congratulations. Your application has been approved." I read the message 3 times before believing it. The certification program would normally have cost nearly 2 months of my disposable income. Suddenly, the entire expense was covered. For several minutes, I simply stared at my screen. It felt unreal. That night, I celebrated with the most luxurious dinner my budget could manage. A $12 pasta special from a neighborhood restaurant. Halfway through the meal, I caught myself smiling for no reason. Hope felt strange after spending so much time focused on survival. Meanwhile, Vincent reviewed another update. Scholarship approved. Employee selected based on merit review. He placed the report aside and looked toward the city lights outside his office. Contrary to what many people believed, influence was not always about power. Sometimes it was simply about removing obstacles that never should have existed. He had not requested special treatment. He had not manipulated outcomes. He had merely encouraged qualified decision-makers to actually review applications that deserved attention. Olivia had earned every opportunity herself. He had simply made sure nobody overlooked her. The distinction mattered to him. A few nights later, I left the office later than usual and stopped at a small coffee shop near Bryant Park. The city air carried the first hints of approaching winter. I ordered a coffee and found an empty table near the window. For the first time in weeks, life felt manageable, stable, hopeful. Then the bell above the entrance rang. I glanced up automatically. A tall man in a dark coat stepped inside. The room barely seemed to notice him. Yet something about his presence immediately drew my attention. I did not know his name. I did not know who he was. But for reasons I could not explain, I found myself watching as he looked around the coffee shop and slowly smiled the moment his eyes found mine. Some meetings feel accidental even when they are not. The moment our eyes met across that coffee shop, I had the strange feeling that I had seen him before. Not because I recognized his face. I did not. It was something else. Something familiar in the way he looked at me. Calm, focused, almost as if he already knew who I was. I immediately dismissed the thought as ridiculous. The man was clearly successful. His dark coat probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. People like him did not spend time thinking about people like me. Yet when he approached my table, his smile remained warm and surprisingly genuine. "May I sit here?" he asked. I glanced around the crowded coffee shop. Nearly every table was occupied. Of course. He thanked me and sat across from me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he looked toward the cup in my hands. "Long day." I laughed softly. "That obvious?" "Only because you look exactly how I feel after most meetings." Something about the answer made me smile. The conversation should have ended there. Instead, it continued. We talked about work. About New York. About how impossible it was to find a quiet place in Manhattan after 6 o'clock. The strange thing was how easy everything felt. Usually conversations with strangers required effort. This one did not. 20 minutes passed before I realized it. "I am Olivia," I said. "Vincent," he replied. The name suited him. Strong, simple, memorable. As we talked, I noticed other details. He listened carefully. He never checked his phone. He asked questions and actually waited for the answers. That alone made him different from most people I met. At one point he asked what I did for work. I explained my position at the logistics company. Instead of looking bored, he seemed genuinely interested. "Do you enjoy it?" he asked. I considered the question. "Some days." He smiled. "That is an honest answer. I try not to waste time with dishonest ones." The amusement in his eyes deepened. Across the room, several people entered the coffee shop. The reaction surprised me. Employees immediately straightened. A few customers glanced toward Vincent with obvious recognition. One older gentleman even nodded respectfully before leaving. I noticed it all. Vincent pretended not to. Curious. Very curious. Before I could ask about it, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen briefly. For the first time all evening, disappointment crossed his face. "I have to go." To my surprise, I felt disappointed too. "Important meeting?" "Unfortunately." He stood and slipped his phone into his pocket. Then he hesitated. "Olivia, may I ask you something?" "Sure." "If I happen to visit this coffee shop again around the same time, would that be entirely unreasonable?" I laughed. "I suppose that depends on the company." "Fair answer." His smile returned. "Then I will take that as encouragement." Before leaving, he thanked me for the conversation. Not politely. Sincerely. As though it had actually mattered to him. I watched him disappear through the entrance and into the Manhattan evening. A few seconds later, curiosity got the better of me. I glanced through the window. A black luxury vehicle waited at the curb. The driver stepped out immediately as Vincent approached. The door opened before he reached it. My eyebrows rose. Definitely successful. Very successful. Yet what stayed with me was not the car. It was the conversation. For the first time in months, I found myself smiling during the subway ride home. Across the city, Vincent sat quietly in the back seat as traffic moved beneath the glow of New York lights. For the first time since he had noticed a woman giving away her lunch in a park, he no longer needed reports to understand her. He had finally heard her laugh, and somehow that mattered even more than everything he had learned before. The truth has a strange way of arriving when you least expect it. A week after meeting Vincent at the coffee shop, our conversations had quietly become part of my routine. We met 3 times that week, then 4 times the next. Sometimes it was coffee, sometimes a walk through Bryant Park. Once it was an hour-long conversation on a bench while the city rushed around us. The remarkable part was how normal it all felt. Vincent never spoke about wealth. He never bragged. He never tried to impress me. If anything, he seemed more interested in listening than talking. That alone made him different from almost every successful person I had ever met. By early November, the certification program had become more demanding. My workload increased. Deadlines multiplied. Sleep became optional. One Thursday morning, I arrived at the office already exhausted. The atmosphere felt strange the moment I stepped through the door. Conversations stopped when I approached. People avoided eye contact. Something was wrong. 20 minutes later, I learned what it was. Senior leadership had announced a restructuring initiative. Several departments would be reduced. Positions would be eliminated. Nobody knew exactly who would be affected. Fear spread through the office faster than any official memo. By lunchtime, rumors were everywhere. Some people were updating resumes. Others were quietly packing personal belongings. Then my manager, Richard, asked me to join him in a conference room. His expression told me everything before he spoke. My stomach tightened immediately. "Olivia," he began carefully, "there are recommendations being made regarding staff reductions." I nodded slowly. "And," Richard sighed, "your name is on the preliminary list." The words landed harder than I expected. For a moment, the room felt unusually quiet. I had spent years working hard, staying late, helping wherever I could. Yet none of that seemed to matter now. "Is the decision final?" I asked. "Not yet." His voice lowered. "Honestly, it does not make sense. Your performance reviews are excellent." "Then why me?" Richard looked uncomfortable. "Budget calculations, position classifications, politics." I wish I had a better answer. I left the meeting feeling numb. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Emails appeared on my screen. Meetings happened. People spoke. I barely heard any of it. By 6 o'clock, I was sitting alone at my desk staring at the city skyline outside the office windows. For the first time in months, hope felt fragile again. Later that evening, I met Vincent at our usual coffee shop. The moment he saw my face, his expression changed. "What happened?" he asked. I tried to smile. It failed immediately. So I told him everything. Not dramatically, just honestly. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, silence settled between us. Finally, he spoke. "Do you believe you deserve to lose your job?" The question surprised me. "No." "Do you believe you have done good work?" "Yes." "Then trust that." I looked down at my coffee. Sometimes that is not enough. Vincent studied me carefully. For a moment, he seemed to be considering something important. Then he nodded slightly, almost to himself. "Perhaps." His voice remained calm. But sometimes people underestimate how quickly circumstances can change. The comment seemed oddly specific. Before I could ask what he meant, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. For the first time since I had met him, I saw something different in his eyes. Not concern, not uncertainty, determination, quiet, absolute, as though a decision had just been made. Somewhere deep inside, I sensed that whatever happened next would not be ordinary. And across the city, powerful people were already beginning conversations that would change everything by morning. The next morning began with confusion. Not panic, not celebration, just confusion. People gathered in small groups throughout the office whispering about an emergency leadership meeting that had apparently taken place before sunrise. Nobody seemed to know exactly what had happened. By 9 o'clock, rumors were moving faster than emails. By 10 o'clock, even the managers looked surprised. I tried focusing on work, but concentration felt impossible. Every few minutes, another message appeared. Another conversation started. Another theory emerged. Then shortly before noon, Richard appeared beside my desk. "Olivia, can you come with me?" My stomach immediately tightened. This was it. The final decision. I followed him toward a conference room and prepared myself for the worst. Instead, I walked into a room filled with executives I had never met before. Several members of senior leadership sat around the table reviewing documents. The atmosphere felt serious but strangely positive. Richard gestured toward an empty chair. "Please sit." I obeyed. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then one of the executives smiled. "Olivia, we have been reviewing department performance, employee evaluations, and future staffing plans." I nodded carefully. "Okay. Your position will not be eliminated." Relief hit me so suddenly that I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I simply exhaled. The executive continued. "In fact, we discovered several inconsistencies in the original recommendations." Several people exchanged uncomfortable glances. "After further review, we determined your contributions have been significantly undervalued." I stared at him. Certain words refused to register. Significantly undervalued. Nobody had ever described my work that way before. Then came the second surprise. A promotion opportunity. Expanded responsibilities. Increased compensation. For a moment, I genuinely wondered if they were talking about someone else. When the meeting finally ended, I walked back toward my desk in complete disbelief. Hannah practically sprinted across the office. "Well?" she demanded. I showed her the paperwork. Her scream nearly echoed through the entire floor. The rest of the day felt unreal. Yet the strangest part arrived later that evening. Vincent and I met at the same coffee shop where everything had begun. The moment he saw me, he seemed to know something had changed. "Good news?" he asked. I sat down and laughed. "How did you know?" His smile remained calm. "Your eyes." I told him everything. Every detail. Every surprise. Every impossible twist. He listened carefully, looking pleased but not surprised. That should have been my first clue. Instead, I was too excited to notice. Halfway through the conversation, a well-dressed man entered the coffee shop. The reaction was immediate. Employees straightened. Customers moved aside. The man looked around the room and instantly approached our table. What happened next changed everything. "Mr. Moretti," the man said respectfully, "the board approved the acquisition this afternoon." I blinked. "Mr. Moretti. Acquisition. Board." The words landed one after another. Vincent's expression remained perfectly calm. "Thank you, David." The man nodded and left. Silence settled between us. Slowly, I turned toward Vincent. "Mr. Moretti." For the first time since we met, he looked slightly uncomfortable. "Olivia." My heartbeat accelerated. "Who exactly are you?" He leaned back and released a quiet breath. Around us, conversations continued. Coffee machines hummed. Manhattan moved forward as always. Yet my world had suddenly stopped. Because in that moment, I realized the man sitting across from me was not simply a successful businessman. And judging by the expression in his eyes, the truth was far bigger than anything I had imagined. Some truths change how you see a person. Others change how you see yourself. I sat frozen for several seconds after asking my question. Vincent did not look away. He did not try to dodge the conversation. If anything, he seemed relieved that the moment had finally arrived. The coffee shop suddenly felt smaller, quieter, more serious. "I should have told you sooner," he said. His voice remained calm, but there was genuine regret behind it. "Told me what?" He glanced down briefly before meeting my eyes again. "I am the majority owner of Moretti Holdings." My heart skipped a beat. Even I knew that name. Almost everyone in New York knew that name. Real estate, investments, technology, hospitality. The company seemed connected to everything. "You own Moretti Holdings?" I asked quietly. "Yes." For a moment I struggled to process the answer. Then dozens of small details from the past few weeks suddenly rearranged themselves inside my mind. The luxury vehicle. The way people reacted around him. The respect. The phone calls. The confidence. None of it had been accidental. "You could have told me." He nodded. "I know." The honesty in his voice made it difficult to stay angry. Then why did you not? For the first time, Vincent smiled sadly. Because I wanted one conversation in my life that was not influenced by my last name. The answer caught me off guard. Silence settled between us. Eventually, I asked the question that mattered most. How did we meet? His expression softened immediately, almost as if he had been waiting for that question from the very beginning. He leaned back slightly and looked toward the city lights beyond the window. Do you remember a little boy in a park? My breath caught. The child who was hungry. Vincent nodded. I was there. Suddenly everything became clear. The park. The reports. The coincidences. The opportunities. The impossible timing. I stared at him. You noticed? Yes. His answer came without hesitation. I noticed. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then he continued. Olivia. I have spent most of my life surrounded by people who wanted something. Money. Access. Influence. Advantage. That afternoon, I watched someone give away the last thing she had because another person needed it more. My eyes lowered toward the table. It was just a sandwich. A quiet smile appeared. No. He shook his head gently. That is where you are wrong. The sincerity in his voice made it impossible to look away. It was never about the sandwich. He paused. It was about the choice. The city lights reflected softly across the window beside us. Somewhere outside, thousands of people hurried through their evenings. Yet in that moment, the entire world seemed unusually still. Vincent continued speaking. I started paying attention because I was curious. Then I learned who you were. Then I realized every story was the same. You kept helping people. You kept choosing kindness. You kept doing the right thing when nobody was watching. I felt unexpectedly emotional. Most people would not think those things matter. Most people are wrong. His answer arrived instantly. We sat together in comfortable silence after that. No dramatic declarations. No impossible promises. Just honesty. The kind that takes time to earn. Eventually Vincent smiled. You changed my life, Olivia. I laughed softly. I gave away a sandwich. Exactly. His eyes held mine. Warm. Certain. Genuine. For the first time I finally understood what he meant. Some people spend years searching for the moment that changes everything. Mine lasted less than 30 seconds on a park bench in Manhattan. I gave away my lunch because a child was hungry. I never expected that one small act of kindness would introduce me to the man who would change my life forever. And maybe that is the lesson. The world rarely changes because of grand gestures. Sometimes it changes because one ordinary person chooses kindness when nobody expects it. And sometimes someone important notices.